Good morning, Alex and friends. I'm Grace. Today is Wednesday, May 13th, 2026, and you're listening to Alex's News. The high in Riverside today is going to be 71.5 degrees, with a low of 58.0 degrees. It is a beautiful, mild day for those in the region. Coming up, we are taking a look at why the delicate relationship between the United States and Iran appears to be on such shaky ground. We will also investigate the situation involving a significant cyber attack that brought California higher education to a complete standstill, leaving students and faculty scrambling to adjust. Along with those reports, we have a variety of other stories and updates to share with you as we break down the day's events. All this and more coming up on Alex's News. Stay tuned. Good morning. We're starting today with a story that has the entire world holding its breath: the increasingly fragile ceasefire between the United States and Iran. President Trump left for Beijing overnight, and his parting words were anything but reassuring. For more, we're joined by our reporter Ethan. Ethan, good morning.
Good morning, Grace. It's quite a moment. Before boarding for the summit, the president told reporters the month-long truce is, in his words, on massive life support. According to The Hill and AOL, he flatly dismissed Iran's latest counterproposal as garbage and stupid. So we're looking at a potential return to full-scale military operations, and the clock is really ticking now.
Wow, those are not the words of a man feeling optimistic. What exactly did Iran put on the table that he rejected so harshly?
So this all traces back to a peace plan delivered through Pakistani mediators. It started as a 10-point document and was later expanded to 14 points. On May 11th, just 2 days ago, Trump told reporters in the Oval Office he didn't even finish reading it. He said previous administrations might have accepted such terms, but he wouldn't. Tehran framed the proposal as reasonable and generous, but according to the Washington Post and Middle East Eye, several items were non-starters at the White House.
Walk us through those sticking points. What was Iran actually asking for?
There were 5 major demands, and any one of them alone would be tough to swallow in Washington. First, war reparations, meaning the U.S. and Israel would pay for damages from the first 40 days of the conflict. Second, full Iranian sovereignty over the Strait of Hormuz, with the right to charge tolls. Third, an immediate end to the U.S. naval blockade that's been in place since mid-April. Fourth, unfreezing all seized Iranian assets. And finally, a regional linkage requiring an end to Israeli operations against Hezbollah in Lebanon.
That's a long wish list. Now I understand there's also a major dispute about uranium. What's going on there?
Yes, and this might be the most explosive piece of all. President Trump claimed on May 11th that Iranian negotiators had verbally agreed to let the U.S. enter Iran and remove roughly 440 kilograms of highly enriched uranium. But when the written proposal arrived, that concession just wasn't in it. Trump called that a flip-flop. However, Al Jazeera and the Associated Press report, Pakistani mediators have not corroborated his claim that any verbal agreement ever existed.
So it's essentially a he said, she said situation at the highest levels of diplomacy. How are analysts reading that?
Diplomatic analysts cited by CBS News suggest this fits a historical pattern. They describe it as truthful hyperbole, where Trump establishes a narrative of betrayal by an adversary to justify escalation. They draw a direct comparison to tactics used with North Korea back in 2018. Meanwhile, Iranian parliamentary speaker Mohammad Bagher Ghalibaf called Trump's claims entirely false. Tehran maintains that domestic enrichment remains a sovereign right, and they're not backing down on that.
Let's talk about how this is hitting people's wallets, because the economic fallout has been massive. What are we seeing at the gas pump?
It's painful, Grace. Brent crude oil has surged past $105 per barrel, with some markets seeing it as high as $107. That's according to The Guardian and G-Captain. Here at home, gasoline prices now average $4.55 per gallon. That's prompted lawmakers like Senator Josh Hawley to call for suspending the federal gas tax, just to give consumers some relief while this crisis drags on.
And the war itself, just remind our listeners how we got here in the first place.
The conflict began on February 28th of this year, so a little over 10 weeks ago, with joint U.S.-Israeli strikes on Iranian nuclear facilities. Those opening strikes also killed Iran's previous supreme leader. Since then, we've had 40 days of active fighting before the current ceasefire took hold. The global economic shock has been severe, and the human cost on both sides has been enormous. This truce was supposed to be the off-ramp, and now it's clearly fraying.
You mentioned the naval blockade earlier. How effective has that actually been?
Well, that depends on who you ask. President Trump claims the blockade is 100% effective, but Lloyd's List reports at least 26 ships have successfully bypassed the line. They're using what's called shadow fleets and ship-to-ship transfers out at sea, so Iranian oil is still finding its way to buyers, just through much more clandestine channels, and that's becoming a real headache for U.S. enforcement efforts.
There was also a Navy operation in the Strait that didn't go as planned. Tell us about that.
That's right. On May 4th, just over a week ago, Trump launched what's called Project Freedom. The idea was to have the U.S. Navy escort commercial vessels through the Strait of Hormuz. But the mission was paused after only 48 hours following swarming attacks by Iranian fast attack boats. ABC News and CNN report the mission remains suspended for now to allow diplomacy room to work. But Trump has threatened to restart it and even expand it if Iran doesn't come around.
Which brings us to Beijing. The president is there now. What's he actually trying to accomplish with President Xi?
It's a 36-hour summit, and the stakes could not be higher. The Wall Street Journal and NPR report the U.S. has two main objectives. First, pressure China to cut off Iran's oil revenue. China buys 90% of Iran's oil, so that's enormous leverage if Beijing will use it. Second, secure Chinese cooperation in reopening the Strait of Hormuz. Without China on board, sanctions just aren't going to bite the way Washington wants.
And is China receptive? They haven't exactly been cooperative lately.
Far from it, actually. On May 2nd, Beijing issued what's called a prohibition order that legally bars Chinese firms from complying with U.S. secondary sanctions. So China has essentially built a legal wall against American pressure. But there are rumors of a creative workaround floating around, something being called the Boeing Compromise. The idea is China would purchase 500 Boeing 737 MAX jets in exchange for the U.S. easing pressure on its oil purchases from Iran.
That's a fascinating piece of horse trading if it happens. What about the military side? Is the Pentagon actually preparing for a return to combat?
They are, and the administration has outlined very clear red lines. Secretary of State Marco Rubio told Fox News that any threat to U.S. personnel or further disruption of safety in the Strait will result in Iran being, quote, blown up, end quote. If diplomacy fails, the U.S. is reportedly prepared to launch what's called Operation Sledgehammer. That's a full-scale military campaign Trump claims could finish the job in 2 to 3 weeks.
And how is Iran's new leadership responding to that kind of threat?
Iran's new supreme leader is Mojtaba Khamenei. He took power after his father was killed in the February strikes, so he's a relatively new figure on the world stage but a hardliner. He dismissed Trump's threats as reckless rhetoric, and he vowed a, quote, powerful confrontation, end quote, if the U.S. resumes offensive operations. So neither side is showing any willingness to blink right now, and that's what makes this moment so dangerous.
Ethan, when you talk to your sources, how close do they really think we are to a return to war?
The honest answer is closer than most people realize. With the ceasefire described as on life support and the global economy already reeling from energy shortages, the Trump-Xi summit in Beijing is being seen as the final off-ramp. If those talks collapse without some kind of breakthrough on Iranian oil, the pieces are essentially in place for Operation Sledgehammer to begin. We could know the answer within days.
A truly precarious moment, and we'll be watching every development out of Beijing. Ethan, thank you so much for breaking all of this down for us this morning.
Thank you, Grace. Always glad to be with you.
That was our reporter Ethan with the very latest on the U.S.-Iran standoff. We'll be right back after this with our next story. Welcome back. Our next story is rattling college campuses across California after a massive cyber attack on the company behind the Canvas learning management system. For more on what happened and who's affected, we're joined by our tech reporter Chloe. Chloe, thanks for being here.
Happy to be with you, Grace. This is one of the largest education sector breaches we've ever seen. The target was Instructure, the parent company of the Canvas Learning Management System, or LMS. A hacking collective called Shiny Hunters compromised the data of more than 1.2 million students across California higher education, and that's just a slice of a global theft involving 275 million people.
That's a staggering number. Walk us through how the attackers got in.
According to Bleeping Computer and Tech Revolt, the initial unauthorized access began in late April of this year. The weak point was something called the Free for Teacher Environment, or FFT. It's a platform meant for unverified educators, and it doesn't have the enterprise-grade security controls of the paid institutional instances. Basically, it was a side door into a much bigger building.
And once they were inside, how did they spread?
Independent researchers at Riscana say the group used cross-site scripting, known as XSS, to inject malicious JavaScript. That let them hijack administrator sessions and move laterally from the FFT environment into the production data stores. The Hacker News reported that even after Instructure detected the cybersecurity incident on April 29th, the attackers stayed embedded inside the system while containment efforts were underway. So this wasn't a quick smash and grab.
Has the company itself addressed what happened?
Yes. In a webinar held today, May 13th, Instructure CEO Steve Daly confirmed that the attackers, quote, weaponized an unspecified vulnerability, end quote, involving support tickets within the FFT environment. By abusing Canvas's own provisioning reports and export APIs, Shiny Hunters exfiltrated roughly 3.65 terabytes of data. And then on May 7th, less than a week ago, things escalated into what's being called a second wave.
A second wave? What did that look like?
The hackers defaced login pages at hundreds of institutions. Students and faculty logging in were greeted by a black screen and a ransom note. And the timing could not have been worse, Grace. The Los Angeles Times described unprecedented, quote, educational chaos, end quote, because this hit during the peak of spring finals week.
Oh no. So how widespread is the disruption in California, specifically?
It's near universal. All 23 California State University, or CSU, campuses reported outages. At Sacramento State and San Francisco State, students were locked out of timed exams and final project portals. All 10 University of California campuses were hit too, with UCLA and UC Berkeley using what they call risk-based phased restorations. And every single one of the 116 California community colleges was affected.
That's essentially the entire state system. Are real students feeling this in real time?
Absolutely. Cal Matters highlighted the deeply disruptive nature of the event, quoting Cal Poly professor Fouad Kosmoud, who noted that this all hit in the waning days of the school year. Social media has been flooded with photos of students at coffee shops and study spots, including one at a Panera Bread in Stockton, just staring at maintenance screens while trying to finish their degrees. Imagine that being your senior year.
Let's talk about what was actually taken. How worried should people be?
Instructure says there's no evidence that passwords, social security numbers, or financial information were stolen. But the 3.65 terabytes that were exfiltrated are still very sensitive. Cyberscoop and the Daily Pennsylvanian confirmed it includes full names and institutional email addresses, student ID numbers, course names and enrollment history, and billions of private Canvas messages exchanged between students, faculty, and staff.
Billions of private messages. What can hackers do with that kind of material?
This is where it gets unsettling. Cybersecurity firms like Bitdefender and Trend Micro warn that this data is, quote, high-grade fuel, end quote, for spear phishing. Because the hackers have actual message histories, they can craft fake emails that, quote, real conversations. Think grade disputes, medical accommodation requests, very personal stuff that makes the lures incredibly convincing.
I understand there was some kind of deal made with the hackers. What happened there?
Yes, and this is the controversial part. On May 12th, just yesterday, the Los Angeles Times reported that Instructure reached an, quote, agreement, end quote, with Shiny Hunters to delete the stolen data. The company didn't disclose how much was paid, but the hackers removed the Instructure listing from their dark web leak site. They also provided what are called digital shred logs as proof of destruction.
Shred logs. That sounds reassuring. Is it?
Not really, according to experts. Analysts from Mandiant and Unit 221B told the Hacker News that shred logs are technically meaningless. They can't prove the hackers didn't make multiple backups or move the data to cold storage before the so-called shredding. Cynthia Kaiser, a senior VP at Halcyon, described the logs as the digital equivalent of a pinky swear from a criminal organization known for re-extortion.
That's a vivid way to put it. Now, what about the legal fallout?
It's already significant. As of today, Instructure is facing at least 18 class action lawsuits. Bloomberg Law notes the case Peterman versus Instructure Inc. alleges the company failed to implement industry standard security, especially given a previous breach back in September of 2025. Another suit, Hines versus KKR & Co. Inc. targets Instructure's parent private equity firm for inadequate cybersecurity investment.
And what about the federal government?
On May 12th, the U.S. Department of Education's Office of Federal Student Aid issued Technology Security Alert General 26-27. That alert initiates a formal investigation into FERPA compliance, which is the federal law protecting student education records. So this isn't just a private lawsuit problem, it's now a regulatory one.
Are state officials weighing in too?
They are. California Attorney General Rob Bonta is currently monitoring the situation. And because Instructure is headquartered in Salt Lake City, the Utah Attorney General has been formally notified as well. So you've got state-level attention on both ends, plus the federal investigation building in parallel.
Has Instructure changed anything on the technical side to prevent this from happening again?
Yes, they've permanently shut down the Free for Teacher program, basically closing the side door the hackers used. Systems have largely been restored, but institutions are putting strict new protocols in place. Schools are being forced to reauthorize all third-party integrations like Zoom and Turnitin in what's called API rotation. It's a tedious but necessary cleanup.
What should students and faculty actually be doing right now to protect themselves?
The official guidance focuses on a few key habits. First, out-of-band verification, meaning faculty should verify any unusual requests through a separate channel like a phone call or Microsoft Teams, rather than replying to emails. Second, a strict no-click policy. Users are warned never to click identity verification links in emails, and instead to type the university URL directly into their browsers.
And what about reporting suspicious activity?
Security teams are asking students to flag any emails that quote their private message history. Those are clear indicators that the stolen data is being used in active spear-phishing campaigns. If you see a stranger referencing a real conversation you had on Canvas, that's a red flag, not a coincidence.
Big picture. What's the takeaway here for the 1.2 million affected students?
Government technology summed up the expert consensus pretty well. While the immediate threat of a public data dump may have been averted by the ransom payment, students should operate under the assumption that their academic and personal communications remain permanently compromised. So even if the hackers say they shredded everything, the safer mindset is to treat this data as out there for good and stay alert for years to come.
That's a sobering note to end on. Chloe, thank you so much for breaking all of this down for us.
Anytime, Grace.
That was our tech reporter Chloe with the latest on the Instructure and Canvas breach affecting California's higher education systems. We'll be right back after this. Here are some other headlines. Dr. Marty Makary resigned as Commissioner of the Food and Drug Administration on May 12, 2026, ending a 13-month tenure that finally went up in smoke. His departure followed a bitter standoff over fruit-flavored e-cigarettes. While the administration pushed for approval, Makary found the youth health concerns too difficult to swallow. President Donald Trump, announced the exit on Truth Social, naming Deputy Food Commissioner Kyle Diamantis as the new big cheese in an acting role. This resignation leaves the Make America Healthy Again team feeling a bit under the weather, as the agency now faces a leadership vacuum alongside the CDC and the Surgeon General's office. Though Makary fast-tracked drug reviews and took a trip into psychedelic medicine, his inconsistent handling of the abortion pill mifepristone left many stakeholders feeling prescribably frustrated. Turning to the high seas, the Justice Department has unsealed federal criminal charges against the operators of the container ship Dali. Prosecutors claim Synergy Marine and Technical Superintendent Radhakrishnan Karthik Nair were really overboard when they deliberately cut corners on safety before the 2024 bridge collapse. By using a maintenance flushing pump to fuel generators, the ship lacked the power to stay on the right track, leading to 6 deaths and $5 billion in economic damage. While Maryland has already reached a $2.25 billion civil settlement with the vessel's interests, the state is still fishing for more from the shipbuilder. A civil trial is set to bridge the gap toward total accountability on June 1, 2026. In global security, Russia successfully launched its RS-28 Sarmat intercontinental ballistic missile, a weapon so intimidating it is often called Satan II. On May 12, 2026, Vladimir Putin hailed the test as a way to keep his nuclear triad in shipshape. With a range exceeding 35,000 kilometers, this missile really goes the distance. The timing was explosive, coming just after a 3-day ceasefire in Ukraine and the expiration of the final nuclear arms treaty. This successful flight follows a history of silo explosions, proving that for the Kremlin, persistence is the mother of invention in an unchecked arms race. Across the pond, the European Union has agreed to sanction extremist Israeli settlers in the West Bank. This diplomatic deadlock was finally broken after Hungary's new Prime Minister Peter Magyar decided to stop playing defense for the previous administration's veto. To keep things balanced, the package also targets leaders of Hamas. While Israeli officials called the move a political theater, the European bloc seems ready to settle the score as West Bank violence continues to climb following the outbreak of war between the United States, Israel, and Iran. Finally, King Charles III delivered his speech at the state opening of Parliament, but the real drama is brewing in the benches. Prime Minister Keir Starmer is currently laboring under intense pressure as 80 lawmakers call for his resignation following local election losses. The King's agenda includes a national wealth fund and digital identification, but critics wonder if Starmer's leadership is reaching its final chapter. With potential rivals waiting in the wings to wear the crown of the Labour Party, the Prime Minister is desperate to prove he still has the golden touch. That's all we have for now. Today's episode was made by Alexander King with Claude Opus 4.6, Gemini Pro 3.1, Gemini Flash 3, and Google Cloud Text-to-Speech. I hope you have a great day. I'll see you tomorrow, Alex.